Welcome to the LDA Podcast, a series by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. Our podcast is dedicated to exploring topics of interest to educators, individuals with learning disabilities, parents, and professionals to work towards our goal of creating a more equitable world. Hi everyone, welcome to the LDA Podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Jeff Karp, a distinguished chair at Brigham and Women's Hospital and professor at Harvard Medical School and MIT. Dr. Karp is also a keynote speaker at our upcoming 62nd annual conference with his session, Harnessing Life Ignition Tools to Empower Learning Differences. Dr. Karp, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. It's so wonderful to have this conversation with you.
So I wanted to give you the opportunity to just tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe even some of the projects that you're working on in the medical field that are really exciting.
Absolutely. Well, when I'm asked that question, I need to start that I am Canadian, born and raised in Canada. I moved to the United States actually in 2004 with my wife and came to Boston really to get into the ecosystem here in the bioengineering community to try to figure out how I could make discoveries in science and then turn them into technologies that could help patients as quickly as possible. And so that's what I do today. I run a research lab at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And my laboratory focuses on the process of medical problem solving. And it's a highly iterative, evolving process. And there's many different sort of facets about it. But essentially, our goal is to try to make scientific discoveries and bring them to patients as quickly as we can. And I've been using formation of of companies, essentially, as a vehicle to move technologies out of the lab. So I've co-founded 13 companies, and many technologies developed in my laboratory are now products on the market that are helping patients, as well as a number that are going through clinical trials. And just briefly, one of the technologies we developed is a glue that was bio-inspired. So we turned to nature for inspiration. And we created a glue that could literally seal holes inside a beating heart and seal blood vessels and gut tissue. And now that's in 2 clinical trials, one for nerve reconstruction, one for hernia repair. We developed a needle that can automatically stop in between the layers of the eye to deliver gene therapy to the back of the eye to potentially treat diseases like macular degeneration. It's really difficult to get drugs to the back of the eye. So we have a needle that we developed. It's like an auto stop needle technology. And then we've developed all kinds of different ways of delivering drugs to the body, to the brain, to the joints, to treat arthritis, to the gut, and yeah, all over the body. So it's kind of a playground, if you will. People come from all over the world. We've had people from over 30 countries in the lab, and highly multidisciplinary. And in my spare time, I just love spending time with my family, and we have 2 dogs. So actually, they're not therapy dogs per se, but I kind of feel like, I just love going to bed with them at night and waking up in the morning and spending all day with them whenever I can. Yeah, I'd like to get out into nature and really experience the nuances that are there and really try to attune to the rhythms of life.
Definitely. Well, and you do a lot of really impressive and really important work. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the lead up to get there, and to go way back. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience as somebody with learning disabilities while you were growing up? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was really hard, actually. And not to say that it's not hard today, but, have a lot more tools and things, and been able to gradually over time create more of a pause in between the stimulus and response is something that I continue to work on. But in the 2nd grade, I was, when I was 7 years old, that's when things really started to present, and I just wasn't able to keep up with anything. Nothing was landing for me. I'd sit at the back of the class really feeling demoralized, and wasn't connecting with anybody as well. So I really didn't have any friends. And my mom tried flashcards. She tried phonics, trying to sound out words. Just nothing was working. At the end of the school year, the teacher pulled my parents aside and said that he wanted me to repeat the second grade, so to hold me back. And it was quite a shock to me to sort of think that through. But luckily, my parents negotiated with the teacher that if I spent the summer catching up with tutors, that I could go on to the third grade. And so my classmates went on vacation, and there I was in summer school. And I'd go in every day and they'd ask a series of questions. It was actually I went to this thing called the Gallup Learning Center. I remember that. I remember actually going in. Sometimes there's these like vivid pictures in your mind, just snapshots throughout your life. And that's definitely one of them, because something transformational happened that summer. And what happened was I'd go in every day and, similar things. And they'd ask me questions. I never really knew the answers or felt like I knew the answers, but I just sort of blurt things out kind of in an insecure way. But one day I did that, and the tutor turned to me and asked a question she had never asked before, which was after I gave this answer. She said, she asked, how did you think about that? And immediately, I kind of felt violated in some way when she asked me that question, because I didn't know that was really possible. And I hadn't really thought about it very much, right? But it really left an impression on me. And I remember sort of going home and that becoming a core focus in my mind. I feel like often in our lives, when we have these things that are said to us or situations we find ourselves in, where there's like an emotional pendulum, like it sort of imprints, something happens and we're like, oh my God. Almost like a fight or flight response. And that just imprinted on me, and it became became a focus of my thoughts. And it was almost like this canvas appeared, and I started to be able to think about thinking. I didn't really know it was possible. Many times in my life, people have told me, think before you speak, right? But I really didn't know how to do that. And that moment really was a light bulb moment, because I started to think about thinking. That's when I really that was a moment in my life where I could it was kind of like where pattern recognition became a thing for me. I started to observe how other students were behaving in certain situations, what they would say, and what the teacher would say, and how they reacted. And then I started to just learn through, I would call it like purposeful or intentional repetition. So, I think we all learn through mimicry. When we're a baby, we sort of look out at the world and we just start mimicking. And it's sort of a natural process. And I found that I really had to put energy and effort into doing that as a survival skill in order to figure out what to say, what not to say in certain situations. So I feel like I often said the thing that was the thing, the thing not to say. And I ended up in the principal's office many times. We got to know them pretty well. The vice principal usually is the one who had to deal with the things first. But over time, what happened was, it was almost like, the way I would describe it is, there's this scene in Terminator where, kind of going way back, where maybe I was like 8 years old or something when that came out, but there was a scene where the Terminator, the first one, is in this room, and the guy's knocking on the door, and he's kind of like, what are you doing? Get out, get out. And the Terminator sort of thinking what to respond, and this screen pops up with maybe 6 different options of what to say. And he kind of pauses, and then he picks, of course, the worst possible one to say. And he says that. But that's how I feel. Like, it's like when I was asked a question, all of a sudden, it's like my mind, I could see multiple answers, and I didn't know which answer the teacher wanted. And it took me extra time to figure out what's the highest probability, for one answer over another. And so that's what really, I struggled a lot because of that. And but I also feel like, today that is an opportunity, right? To be like, to channel creativity and be able to see things from different angles. So it's almost like the rigidity of the school system really clashed with how my mind worked. And I almost felt like it was like I had this hardware, if you kind of think of the computer analogy, but I didn't have software that worked for me. And I knew the hardware was there. And, my mom kept telling me I have very, very, very supportive parents. And, my dad would help me with all sorts of math problems and physics and all this kind of stuff. My mom would help me with all kinds of other things. But I have so much to say, by the way. So want to pause for a moment here because I know I could just go on and on, but
No, that was great. And you already started on this question that I had, but you mentioned that the tutor was sort of the catalyst to get you to think about thinking.
yeah,
What are some things, and the support from your parents as well sounded really key. But what would you say was key for you to begin to thrive in that classroom? I mean, you noticed
yeah.
different patterns, picking up things that way. What would you say were some of the key things for you to be able to thrive?
Yeah, so I think pattern recognition was really key because it was almost like there was this social this language of how school worked and how people communicated with each other, and I didn't get it. It didn't make sense to me, um, and so being able to gradually observe. I think we're all born and throughout our lives we have this incredible power of observation, and I think that sort of the society that we live in today, we're sort of gradually or maybe quickly sort of disengaging that power of observation. And so I feel the power of observation for me was a key survival mechanism or approach or tool, because it allowed me to learn the code. I realized when I was younger, I was the coder of my own brain, essentially. And that if I didn't put effort and energy into it, that nothing was really going to, I just probably was going to fall through the cracks because I was a C and D student. Now, the other thing, until the seventh grade, the other thing that was really key, and I'm glad you asked this question, is that while everything was sort of crashing and burning for me in school, and I just would have a lot of anxiety too because I wouldn't understand instructions. Everything was vague to me. I just and still to this day, when my children ask me to help them with their homework, it doesn't go very well often because I just find the questions are so vague that are being asked, and there's just so many ways of thinking about it. And again, it's like what's the way they want me to think about it, and I don't know. So one thing that really helped me actually, because I really had a lack of confidence and low self-esteem, and I had teachers that would say, call me lazy. They would call me, that I'm never going to amount to much. What do you want to be? I'd say, oh, I want to be a doctor or a dentist or whatever it was. And they said, oh, you better set your sights lower, because you don't have it in you. And it's kind of interesting. It was a bit demoralizing, but there was something inside of me that was kind of like this like spark that I could identify with, that I just sort of prevented me from spiraling further down. And what was really helpful is that in the fourth or fifth grade, I think it was the fourth grade, we started to do these speech competitions in my school. And it was like a thing, I don't know if it was like a Canadian thing or I can't figure it out, but but my mom would write the speeches for me. And then she would sort of help me memorize. And I was terrible at memorizing, like the worst. But she started with just one word. And then if you can do one word, you can do two words. Like it's really that is really it with any skill. Like if you can do one step, you can take the next and the next and the next. And eventually there's a lot of steps there. So I feel like that's something that we all need to sort of think about. Like we're like, oh, I'm so bad at that. But to me, it's sort of once you find a process that works for you, you can actually start taking these baby steps. And so, it was two words, and then it was a sentence and a paragraph and a page. And eventually I had the whole speech, memorized, and my mom coached me how to say it. And it was really frustrating, very difficult for me to do that, but she really stuck with it. And I think, I probably used a lot of swear words and, slamming on my door and, like that kind of thing, like just anger, but she stuck with it. And what happened was I started winning competitions. I started to become the kid to beat. I started taking home trophies. I would win in my class. I'd then go to the school. I won a number of times there, and I went to the city and, got on local television, that kind of a thing. And so to me, it was almost like that, just having one thing that you can gradually develop confidence in for everybody, child, adult, to me, it's just so important to always just have that one thing that you're sort of making progress in, because it really can have a domino effect throughout your life. And you can just sort of take that as a model and say, okay, where else can I apply that? And so that gave me this hope that I don't think I don't know if I would have survived. And then the other thing that I'll mention is that the school that I was in, it was a small kind of school. It was in hour and a half northeast of Toronto, in a small city of about 65,000 people called Peterborough. And they didn't really, learning differences, ADHD, they weren't really knowledgeable about it, and they didn't really want to do anything. They only had a certain amount of resources. So my mom actually built up this case of everything that had ever been said about me, all my grades, all the report cards, everything, and my assignments, everything. And she went to the school board on her own and demanded that they take a look at me. And she'd gotten through half the file, and they're like, "This is unequivocally, unequivocally identified as having a learning disability." And so I was then able to get accommodations, and so I got extra time and extra space, which, by the way, I got not only in the tail end of elementary school, but high school. I got it in my undergrad and in grad school. And my grades literally from grade 6 to 7 went from C's and D's to straight A's. Because I had been developing these tools along the way. Finally, I had the accommodations I needed. I just needed extra time. I needed a quiet space to do things, and that was the ticket. By the way, I still had to work 2 to 3 times harder than everybody else, like constantly. So I had to give up a lot of socializing to be able to, maintain kind of those type of grades. But yeah, those are the things I would say were really critical for me, was having one thing that I was confident in, and the power of observation, and then having supportive parents, someone who just really believed in me.
Definitely. And that's something that we hear a lot too, is the finding an area to excel in. And especially there's a lot of supportive parents out there who are willing to do the most for their kids, and it really benefits. So just a little bit more on that note, could you tell us about your life ignition tools, and how did you go about forming these tools? It sounds like you kind of became a little more self-aware of how you knew how to think, and did those tools form from there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, the life ignition tools really were discovered through the laboratory of my own life, I would say, and really began in between the second and third grade, when I was asked that question. How did you think about that? And so many, that moment actually, or that experience, really started to not just sort of help me tune into the power of observation, but it helped me to identify, like it sort of focused my attention on things that could help me, right? And one example, I get off the bus. So we moved out to the country actually when I was in the third grade, which was, had its pros and cons, but I loved it. I mean, it was a con because I was now, the socialization wasn't easy for me, and I wasn't connected. Now I'm actually farther away from everybody. The closest neighbor was like a 20-minute walk. But it was incredible because, there was like a sheep farm beside us, a buffalo farm across the road, a farmer's field in my backyard. My driveway was like 1,000 feet long, and there was like a bridge with a creek running across it. And I wake up in the middle of the night, and there'd be a pack of wolves on my front lawn. And I could just go on and tell you about all kinds of things. But I would get off the bus, and I would be so tired. I'd be so exhausted, kind of demoralized, or I was trying to fit in, I was trying to assimilate, I was trying to figure it out, and that required a lot of energy, a lot of mental capacity to do that. So I would just be very drained and kind of ruminating after I got off the bus. And as I walked along my driveway, there were no cell phones or anything back then. I would just kind of walk along this 1,000-foot driveway, which was carved through a forest, and I just look at the trees and the shapes of everything, and see animals all the time, and just the smells and sounds. I would just tune into it. And as I walked, it was like each step I took, I felt like nature's embrace, like I could feel it, almost like nature was hugging me. And it was very, kind of looking back, it was very therapeutic, to have that walk after school, kind of calm me down. And that's one of the tools, is actually hug nature, which is, really all about in today's society, we're kind of moving further and further away from nature, our own nature. And I think that the scientific evidence is really unequivocal that spending time in nature can lower our heart rate, can lower our blood pressure, can give us a general sense of well-being. It can reduce anxiety, and and it's not just what you see; it's what you're smelling and hearing, and it's just like this immersive experience. And the research is also starting to show that it's important to go into nature and even just close your eyes for several minutes and just sort of sit with whatever you're just sort of use your powers of observation. And so Hug Nature to me is this tool that has stuck with me because as I kind of move more into urban settings, where I went to college, for example, and then where I live now. There's so many things we can do during the day to connect with nature. Like one of the things that I do is when I'm walking the dogs, I cycle through my senses. So I'll actually say sight, and I'll just try to focus my attention on what I'm seeing, like the texture of the bark of the trees and the tops of the trees, and all the shapes and things and colors, and the way the light's reflecting off of everything. And then I'll say sound, and I'll listen for the birds and the rustling of the wind and the leaves, and and then I'll say touch, and I'll feel the my clothing against my skin, and I'll feel my heels hit the ground. And to me, like it's very powerful when you practice it, because you start to notice the nuances. Like our powers of observation are really, really powerful, but they're dimmed in this culture that we live in. And there's so many things that we do where it's just like our attention is grabbed onto something that doesn't require us to observe. We're kind of spoon-fed a lot of things, like all the stuff online. But I think for thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years, our powers of observation like helped us to survive, and we're all the nuances there. So this tool of attuning to the rhythms of life and connecting with nature regardless of where you are, to me is so powerful, because it's such a nice like outlet. It's such a nice way to move our brains from the fight or flight response, which we're in constantly from everything we're experiencing, to more of a calmed state. And my personal belief is that people who are neurodiverse, whether it be autism or learning disabilities or ADHD, whatever it is, my belief is that those people actually really helped with survival for tens of thousands of years, because you're able to notice things and patterns in nature that others would miss. And then that really helped, like basically where to go or where to get food, or where not to go, or what might be edible, these kinds of things. I think there was a real benefit of being neurodiverse in terms of helping the community to survive. But then if you sort of look at today, we're these very rigid structures, like this school system and the corporations that we've created. It's incredibly rigid, and I think it really it does a major disservice and almost creates this situation where we're looking at these learning, we have to call it a learning disability in order to get the services, but it's really not a disability. Like it's really, to me, it was the opposite. For tens of thousands of years, it was like an asset to have these things, but now it's a disability because of how we've constructed our organizations. But anyhow, so I just mentioned, one of the tools. There's 12 life ignition tools as part of a book that I wrote that came out in April. But really, they're all the survival tools that I sort of tapped into over the years and then eventually used to thrive.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know your session's going to touch on that a little bit more too, which we're excited about.
Yeah.
But you had alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to dive in a little bit more. So you had talked about these tools that you have to overcome your learning disability. Would you say that you've totally overcome your learning disability, or there's still tasks that are challenging for you that you sort of find workarounds for?
Well, I think that I don't think you ever get rid of it, because I think it's part of like your wiring. It's part of your, the fabric of the cells in your body, your DNA, or, it's part of who you are. And so to me, it's not a matter of kind of, I don't think it's possible to fully get rid of any one particular thing. But I think what you can do is, like, one thing we can all work on, people even who don't have learning differences, is we can create, like, it's almost like we tend to be very reactive, right? And I think as well, the digital world that we sort of are submersed within makes us even more reactive, right? Like, it's just the pings and things we're getting constantly. And this reactivity is something that in many ways is a choice, how fast we react to things. Because what I've learned through my experience is that, and this is actually another one of the tools, which is called press pause. And it's like, if you find a way to create pauses in your response. So let's say you hear something and you quickly want to say something in response to it. But if you're able to pause and think about thinking, right, in that moment, it allows you to then tailor your response. It allows you to also tailor the emotion that's associated with that response. And so to me, it's like, I still get lots of triggers. I still get the impulse, a very impulsive reactivity. But I feel like through practicing pauses in my day in a very intentional, purposeful way, I'm able to, in my interactions with other people, be more regulated. And so that's what I think we can really work on. Like, there's that regulation aspect. And, everybody's different, and everybody has different challenges in that regulation piece. So we're, it's important. Like, I feel like, we talk about ADHD. It's like no two people with ADHD are going to be identical, but there'll probably be a lot of similarities, but like there'll also be differences. And so, there's that whole spectrum. But I just think that there's so many things, like, the forgetfulness, of walking into a room and trying to figure out, why did I just come into this room? Or did I feed the dogs, or did I not feed the dogs yet? Like, I can't remember. Like, that happens all the time. I mean, even the simplest things, like, is my, house number 239 or 237? Like, sometimes I forget, like, those simple things, like, or even my phone number. Like, it's just, every once in a while, my mind will be in a state, and it's so easy to quickly move into self-shame when those things happen. But I found tools also to actually prevent that most of the time. So for example, I mean, there's so many examples I could give you, but like, one example is, if I send an email out and I don't hear back, my immediate response is, oh my God, I said something too much. Like, I offended the person. They don't like me. And then, so what I did, recently, I sort of thought, okay, well, this is happening kind of frequently, and I need to do something about it, because it's kind of bringing me into this negative space. I was like, okay, well, what could I do? Well, I'm thinking, well, why do I feel that way? And I feel that way because I care, because I want to be connected to this person. And then I think, well, caring is a quality that I like, that I want to cultivate more of in myself. And so I was able to switch it from a negative to a positive, because, and that allowed me to then sort of unhook or detach from the negativity that my mind wanted to sort of ruminate towards. And I think one of the challenges for me is that, my mind does, I'll give you, I mean, I could just give you tons of examples, because I'm constantly tinkering and doing these things. When I go to bed at night, I'll give you another tool, and then I'll pause, and I'll push pause. But when I go to bed at night, I feel like rumination, self-shame, all these things, it doesn't require any energy to do these things. They're really easy to do, like, it's just so easy to go into negativity and just be like caught in that. It's like almost like an indulgence in a way, because it's just so easy to be there. But what I realized is that, okay, I was like, my mind, I had all these visualizations and things when I was a kid, like just in my imagination going all over the place. And I would use it as an escape, actually, when I was younger, and maybe a little bit to this day as well. But what I do is, I'm like, okay, how can I use this to my advantage? And so what I do is, I envision myself as a miniature version of myself standing on the backs of creatures in nature. And I think to myself, what would that experience be like? What, like all my senses. So if I'm standing on top of a bumblebee, for example, what does the texture feel like on my feet? Right? Like, what am I seeing? I'm going into and out of the flower. Do I like what I feel like the wind from the wings, right? Like, what's the sound, right? And so when I start thinking about those things, immediately it allows me to unhook or detach from the rumination, from the negativity. Oh, I forgot to send that email. Oh my God, I have a presentation in 2 days I didn't prepare for. All these things that I'm thinking about that will just keep me up all night. And it allows me to fall asleep super fast because I'm using a little bit of energy to envision myself. I'm now switching from, to curiosity. And I think sort of like that combination of curiosity and requiring a little energy to sort of think about, oh, what would my experience be like? It just allows me to just let my natural sort of rhythms take over and fall asleep. So it actually works incredibly well. And I it's not just a bee. I mean, I stand on the back of like whales and camels and ants and monarch butterflies that are migrating. I just sort of come up with different things. So
Yeah, like a redirection of that energy.
yeah, exactly.
Well, and I really liked your answer too, that learning disabilities and related conditions, they're always going to be there. They're always going to stick around. But whether you're neurodiverse or not, there are things that you can train your brain to do so you can get out of these negative cycles, like you just mentioned. So I really love that answer.
Mm.
And you had mentioned too in your answer that about self-shame. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that because when we interview people with LD, a lot of the times they'll bring up that self-shame. So could you talk a little bit about that and how can somebody fight this negative self-talk about themselves?
Yeah. Well, I think that again, I mean, I feel like if we go back, tens of thousands of years, um, I can't see this really being a thing because I just think again, that I think neurodiversity was really an asset to for survival, right? I mean, we were outside working hard all day and like trying to find resources and figure out, where we should go next. We were all nomads, right? Like kind of just traversing the globe. But I think so today, I really feel like the self-shame is a lot a product of our society and where we've kind of evolved, as communities and in our organizations. I think it's important to recognize that because to me, I think the self-shame often you think that it's really you. But what I've kind of realized through, thinking about this and doing research and things is that it really isn't. It's really a product of there being a mismatch in terms of just your wiring and sort of the institution or the framework of whatever organization you're in, right? And the rigidity kind of associated with that. And I think that it's amplified as well when you're online because we have this comparison culture. And I think that, the content online is like hyper curated to make everything look like so amazing and people's responses be so crisp and so clear and right. And I think that that also has a very big negative effect on our self-esteem. And in many ways, I think that the online sort of digital world preys not intentionally, I hope, but unintentionally, I think, on people who are neurodiverse. And that self-shame, because it just amplifies the self-shame, right? And I think that the problem too is that I was shamed by others when I was younger, and I think that programs in then this wiring for self-shame to then just loop, right? Like it's like the voices of others are now imprinted because there was an emotional sort of response that, it was a bit very triggering to have somebody of authority say something negative to you that was like attacking your being, like who you are. And having that at such a young age just imprints, and it's hard for that to ever go away. And so that, I think, then to me, the self-shame is then you kind of latch on to that and it just repeats, it just loops. And there's so many ways to be triggered. And to me, one of the ways that I've tried to deal with it is to sort of be able to, well, I think one is to pause. So pressing pause is really key. And then I think another one, actually one of the dogs just came to say hi to me. So you see me kind of leaning over to one side, that's what's happening. But it's Ginger down here. But I think so pausing, I think, is so important because then it allows you to reflect and almost get out of it helps you to sort of observe what's happening and start to be curious about it. And then I think once you start to be curious about it, I think there's ways to then question it. Like I said, with the emails, right? Like there's ways to sort of ask what's behind it. Like, for example, let's say I'm in traffic and I'm getting really frustrated because things are moving slow or someone's cut me off or whatever. And it just like all of a sudden, I mean, not necessarily self-shame, but sort of similar, like a parallel track. All of a sudden I just get angry and I'm like, oh, what's going on? And, fight or flight just hits me really quickly. If I can find a way to switch to curiosity, like say, oh, where's that person going? And what did they go through last night? And what are they experiencing in their life? Like, why would they be so angry right now when they're driving or be doing those things? And maybe there's something behind that that's responsible. And, maybe they're had a difficult morning or they're having a difficult time in their life. Then all of a sudden you start to, through curiosity, you can access empathy and compassion, and you're able to then switch. So to me, there's all these like tools, and a lot of it, I think, is pausing to access curiosity. And when you're able to become curious, I think then you start to develop this understanding, which then helps you to have a tool to unhook from that self-shame.
Yeah, I really like that answer. You brought up a lot of good points about it starting externally. Unfortunately, that is still very much the case for a lot of people, is that they hear negative feedback and can internalize it. So I really like pausing and thinking and being curious.
And by the way, I mean, I feel like even just pausing here, I mean, it's so sad to think about all the children that this is, like in this moment, like right now, that are being, having these emotional imprints that are then, they're going to be triggered for the rest of their life because of it. And, it just, to me, it's just so unfair and sad. And I think that, I think in particular the education system, I think it's kind of stating the obvious, but like, definitely needs a big overhaul. But I'm really excited of where things are going with AI, because I do think that there's a lot of personalization that can happen. I mean, there's a lot of ways it can go in a negative way as well, but I like to think about the positive sort of possibilities in there. And I think being able to more personalize education through understanding where people are at, and then adjusting the plans and giving people the time they need and kind of guiding people and supporting them along the way. I really feel like AI, I've spoken to some people in the community who are involved in creating next generation sort of educational AI platforms. And I really think the future is bright there, especially for neurodiverse children.
Well, that's some good news. And that could be a whole podcast episode on its own, AI and education.
Yeah.
But I agree with what you say. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, a lot of the stories that we hear are people from their early childhood being told that they're not good enough, or similar messages. And I don't think necessarily people realize how long that can stick with you and have an impact.
Yeah, and then on top of it, it's like the digital culture is amplifying. It's really preying on, and again, I don't think it's intentional most of the time, but like is preying on the neurodiverse, especially children, right? And I mean adults too. And there's just so much overwhelming information coming in, and it's almost wiring us for our attention to be even less than where we sort of, the baseline of where we start from. And I think that if you're neurodiverse or have ADHD, whatever it is, it's almost going to make it even more difficult to fit in within these rigid structures of school systems and companies. And so I really hope that these new models happened quickly, because it's really becoming more and more problematic every day.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and before I let you go here, I wanted to ask just a little bit more about your session. Without giving too much away, can you tell us what we can expect from your session at our 62nd annual conference in Orlando?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm really excited about this session, and it's one of these things where I really didn't speak about my challenges and my struggles for many, many years. And, other than to advocate for myself to get the extra time and resources, I kind of kept it all within. And when I started writing this book 7 or 8 years ago, and started to really think back to the times, because there were a lot of painful sort of moments in my life. And I really felt it was important to I needed to relive those, and I really needed to tell the story and share the tools, with others that I developed to survive and then eventually thrive. And I'm just really excited to have this opportunity to now, really for the first time, just to take the stage and share my story and the details and just share all the key insights that I've gained throughout my life that have been really foundational and instrumental for me to understand things, but then also tools that have helped me to live with the wiring that I have, and to really deepen connections with other people and have great, social interactions now with others, and to be able to be more efficient in what I'm doing, and to maximize creativity and lead with curiosity and maximize innovation. So I'm just really excited to share all those insights. And I just thank you so much for that opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast. To learn more about LDA and to get valuable resources and support, visit ldaamerica.org.